The dark secrets of a rich and happy family. It's often said that great wealth can corrupt even the best of people, but in reality, that's not entirely accurate. Wealth simply amplifies the existing negative qualities in a person, providing a sense of impunity and permissiveness. While the absence of money is certainly not pleasant, it's important to remember that banknotes, jewels, and figures on bank accounts, by themselves, cannot bring happiness, especially if they were obtained through dishonest means or at the expense of someone else's life. The case of Sarita and Leon Brits in 2020 shook not just South Africa, where this dramatic story unfolded, but also the entire world. The investigation promised to be challenging, with an innocent individual initially becoming the main suspect. It wasn't until an unexpected and heartfelt confession emerged that the true perpetrator, who had the least malice towards the victim, was identified. Now, let's delve into the complicated scheme from the beginning, where money became a stumbling block in what many considered to be a large, harmonious family. The Brits family. The Brits, a family of European immigrants, settled in the early 1970s in the small but cozy town of Pofadder, located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Despite its modest size, this town is an important economic and tourist hub in the region known as Bushmanland. It's also worth noting that the surrounding landscapes are incredibly picturesque, attracting biologists and researchers with their diverse flora and fauna. In 1976, the Brits had their first son, whom they named Toki, and in 1979, their second son, Leon, was born. Even by local standards, the family was considered quite affluent. The family patriarch owned what was arguably the only major hotel in the area, which eventually grew into a comprehensive hotel and restaurant complex. Both brothers excelled in school, were active in sports, and thanks to their parents' efforts, received prestigious educations. After completing his studies, Toki left his hometown, while Leon, who had been helping his parents and learning the intricacies of the hotel business from his teenage years, decided to stay to eventually take over the reins of management. He was intelligent, attentive to detail, and possessed a so-called entrepreneurial vein, enabling him to manage affairs effectively. The story of Cinderella. At the hotel complex owned by the Brits family, various events, parties, and celebrations were often held. At one such event, Leon noticed a young beauty among the guests. A slender brunette with green eyes and a captivating smile caught his eye immediately. The young man decided to approach her and introduce himself, only to find out that she was just 14 years old and she was in school, though she appeared much older. This fact deeply unsettled Leon, who was already 25 at the time, but he still decided to invite the beauty for a dance, and afterward, they spent about an hour chatting while sitting on the terrace. The schoolgirl's name was Sarita, and from that very first meeting, Brits couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly dreaming of their next encounter. But let's delve a bit into who this enchanting young stranger was. Sarita Kerr was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children in a family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family lived in poverty, and her parents had been teetering on the brink of divorce for many years, exacerbating the already difficult situation. When the youngest daughter was only 9 years old, the head of the family tragically died from a venomous snake bite, leaving the mother alone with 3 children, barely making ends meet. All the Kerr children had to work to survive, making Sarita's childhood a difficult period filled with hardships and deprivation. But then, a wealthy suitor suddenly appeared in her life, ready to lay the world at her feet. Due to her young age, the girl didn't understand how to react to the attention from an adult man who was 11 years older than her. Leon seemed genuinely in love. He sought any excuse to meet with the girl, picked her up after school, took her to popular restaurants, bought expensive gifts, fashionable clothes, and tried to please her in every way possible. Sarita received things she had always been deprived of, and luxury literally went to the schoolgirl's head. She understood that with this man, she could build a family, and neither they nor their children would ever want for anything. The girl's mother, despite her daughter's young age, approved of the relationship. Leon seemed to her a reliable, decent, and kind person, and no one doubted the sincerity of his feelings. However, the young man's parents were very worried about his romance with her, as such relationships, if they went too far, could be considered a criminal offense. But the young man insisted he was willing to wait until his beloved turned 18, after which he would officially marry her. Unexpected pregnancy. About a year into their relationship, 15-year-old Sareta realized she was pregnant. She was hesitant to tell anyone, knowing that the news would not please either her mother or her lover. The girl began to wear baggy clothes to hide her changed figure and became withdrawn and uncommunicative, but she could no longer keep everything secret and decided to confess everything to her partner. The news of the impending addition was a shock to Leon. He understood that she could not only tarnish his reputation, but also lead to serious legal problems. The closeness between them had been initiated by him, and now he could be accused of seducing a teenager, which he couldn't allow. First, the man paid for a visit to a private clinic, where they not only confirmed the pregnancy, but also discovered that she was expecting twins. With the term approaching a critical point, Leon found a doctor at the same private clinic who agreed to terminate the pregnancy anonymously. Sareta was devastated and felt completely crushed, as her partner, who had promised to love and protect her, forcibly persuaded her to terminate their unborn children. However, Leon, being older, was able to pressure her and convince her of the necessity of the procedure. He promised that in the future, when they got married, they would definitely have children, but for now, it would simply destroy their lives and plans for a happy future together. The young woman had no choice but to comply, and she did as her boyfriend asked. She suffered from pain for several days after, but the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of guilt and overwhelming depression. Sareta stayed in her room, cried constantly, and didn't know how to continue living with this. Her mother didn't show much interest in her condition, assuming her daughter was just upset over some argument with her boyfriend. But everything would pass once they reconciled. A couple of days later, Leon actually showed up at his beloved's doorstep and took her to the city to distract her, to walk in the park, and to browse through stores. He believed this would help her recover faster and lift her spirits. Sure enough, she soon managed to return to her previous life, but the feelings of resentment and distrust towards her partner lingered. Forced marriage. 3 years later, while the young woman was in her senior year of high school, she discovered she was pregnant again. At that time, she was only a few months away from becoming an adult, and this unexpected, delicate condition was not supposed to cause any particular issues. However, when she told Leon about it, he reacted very negatively again and insisted that his beloved terminate the pregnancy, arguing that they were too young to start a family. This time, Sareta firmly refused, stating that she would not do it and would keep the child, even if it meant raising it on her own. After some thought, Leon eventually made an official proposal, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. By then, their once tender feelings had considerably dulled, but this renewed promise and Sareta's ongoing pregnancy left him with no choice. By the time she graduated from high school, the changes in her figure were already obvious, and in the fall, as soon as she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. The newlyweds appeared quite happy, but each had certain doubts about the correctness of their decision. A few months later, the couple had their first son, and 2 years after that, twin boys were born. The family lived in affluence, able to indulge in anything they wanted, and from the outside they looked successful, well-off, and happy. Family business. The business founded and developed over many years by Leon's parents was quite profitable. Over time, the man also started his own chain of stores and fast food eateries, and his ventures were on the rise, with the family business flourishing. However, from the mid-2010s, the family began to experience troubles and misfortunes. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart issues, and his mother's health deteriorated from the shock of losing her husband. She soon showed rapidly progressing signs of dementia, forcing her sons to place her in a specialized clinic for necessary care and proper attention. Toki returned to his hometown after many years away to help his brother manage the business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. At the same time, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business, something she had long aspired to do. It was decided to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She dove into work while also continuing to raise their 3 young sons. Life between two cities. Brits, the eldest son, started elementary school in his hometown of Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents faced the pressing issue of choosing a suitable educational institution for all their children. The challenge was that finding quality education in South Africa was not so straightforward. The spouses found a good school in the nearby city of Kakamas. The school was about 75 miles from Brits's home, but there was no need for daily travel back and forth. The couple decided to rent a spacious house in Kakamas, where Sareta moved with the sons, but Leon stayed in Pofadder as he could not leave the business and manage affairs remotely. However, the wife had to step back from managing the store, although she really enjoyed it and was quite successful at it. The woman dedicated herself entirely to raising the sons, and they only visited home to see their husband and father on weekends and holidays. Leon himself rarely came to Kakamas due to his busy schedule. Initially, it seemed that everything was in order, but over time, the spouses drifted further apart, and their feelings significantly cooled. Battle with a deadly illness. In 2018, Sareta started having health problems, which he did not take seriously at first. However, an examination revealed that the young woman had oncology and problems with the cardiovascular system. Soon, she underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and was prescribed a treatment course. Fortunately, all procedures were timely, saving the life of the mother of 3. But from then on, for prevention, she needed periodic therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had the means, and Leon would never skimp on the health of his son's mother. Additionally, Sareta hired a nanny and a housekeeper who helped her around the house and looked after the children, which was essential when the woman went for treatment. By that time, the spouses had drifted so far apart that each essentially lived their own life. The young woman started an affair in Johannesburg, so when going for another course of preventive therapy, she would not stay in a hotel, but at her lover's place. Leon, apparently, also periodically had women, as compromising photos and messages found in his phone suggested. In fact, nothing but their 3 children bound the couple together anymore. Enemies and envy. The family issues did not affect the business, which continued to thrive. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain were generating impressive profits, some of which Leon invested in real estate in major cities, earning a good income from rentals. Undoubtedly, their family was not only the wealthiest in Pofadder, but also among the most affluent in the northern Cape Province. Naturally, the Brits had many enviers and ill-wishers, whose numbers grew in proportion to the profitability of their business. Leon, his parents, and his brother regularly received threats and various demands. Leon himself often confided in his wife that he had long felt unsafe and feared that someone might try to take away his life's work. In each of Leon's offices, as well as at his and his parents' homes, there were safes and cleverly disguised hiding places storing cash in various currencies, securities, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Sareta knew only about some of them, specifically those in their own home in Pofadder. Initially, the threats were a serious concern, but over time, as the man began receiving them daily, he simply stopped paying attention to them. He believed they were just attempts to intimidate him, as the ill-wishers had never tried to act on their threats. However, a tragedy soon occurred that ended Leon's life. Body in the pool. On October 7, 2020, Leon's wife called him and asked him to check on their dogs, which, according to a neighbor, had gotten out. Leon promised to call back as soon as he arrived and checked that everything was in order, but the return call never came. Concerned, Sareta called her husband's number several times, but no one answered. Leaving the children with the nanny, she drove to Pofadder. The front door was unlocked, but it seemed that no one was home. It was suspiciously quiet inside, and no one responded to her calls. She then went to the backyard, where where she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, the water was tinged pink with blood, and it was clear that he was deceased. Panicking, Sureta called the police, the emergency services, and then dialed Toki, informing him of the incident. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately cordoned off the house as a crime scene. It was evident that the businessman's death was violent. The body had several stab wounds and signs of a struggle, and a safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. An initial theory was that burglars had broken into the house, and the homeowner, returning unexpectedly, had caught them off guard, paying with his life. However, many other valuable items in plain sight remained untouched, suggesting the burglars had specifically targeted what was in the safe. Prime suspect. The murder of the successful and wealthy businessman quickly made a lot of noise, hotly discussed in the media and on social networks, generating numerous rumors, gossip, and speculations. Many knew about the long-standing threats against Brits and believed that competitors or ill-wishers had fulfilled their threats. However, the first and key suspect in the case became Toki, who had been managing the family business with his brother for the last few years. First, he had visited Leon shortly before the tragedy and was considered the last person to see him alive. Second, their mother was in very poor health, with doctors giving her only a few months to live, and her will, reportedly, was stored at the younger son's house. The prevailing theory was that the elder brother disagreed with the business mostly going to Leon and wanted to access the will to alter it. This explained why the other items in the house remained untouched. It was also suspected that he did not act alone, and murder was not part of the original plan. Toki categorically denied any involvement and stated that under no circumstances would he harm his own brother, especially since they had never had disputes or disagreements over financial matters. He sought support from Sureta, who asserted that she believed him and would help find the best lawyer to prove his innocence. Unexpected confession. For nearly 2 months, the investigation was at a standstill with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses emerging. However, one day, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and offered to make a deal by pleading guilty and revealing all his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. It turned out that Jacques had once attended the same school as Sureta. They were friends, and he even had feelings for her, but she did not reciprocate and soon started a relationship with Léon. The former friends had not seen each other for many years, but one day they coincidentally met at a shopping center and started talking. At that time, Jacques was going through a tough period. He had divorced his wife, lost his job, developed a dependence on alcohol, and was in dire need of money. Sureta saw that her former admirer still harbored tender feelings for her, so she began to confide in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed that her husband mistreated her, was abusive, but she could not leave him because he threatened to take their sons and leave her with nothing. This topic was painful for Van Vuren since his ex-wife had barred him from seeing their children after the divorce, and he genuinely empathized with Sureta and wanted to help. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Sureta, having devised a cunning plan, called her former friend and tearfully told him that her husband had beaten her. She said she couldn't leave him, and the only solution was to eliminate the tyrant. Sureta was very persuasive, and Jacques believed her. Moreover, she promised him 500,000 South African rand as payment, and he, as mentioned, was in desperate need of money. Jacques agreed to help Sureta, but he did not want to do the dirty work himself, so he decided to hire other people. The plan was developed in early 2020, but due to the global epidemic that swept the world, its execution had to be delayed. During this difficult time, the Brits family business suffered colossal losses. A store and part of the restaurants had to be closed, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, which his wife did not agree with. In late September, the conspirators returned to the original plan, but Jacques requested half of the payment up front. However, due to financial difficulties, Sureta could only withdraw 100,000 rand and also gave her accomplice her engagement ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrique Williams, who had drug issues and was willing to commit murder for money. However, Williams was afraid he couldn't handle a grown, strong man alone, so he brought along his 25-year-old friend, Amantla Bareki, to share the fee. Sureta gave the criminals access to the house, informed them about the safe's location, and allowed them to take whatever they liked to make the robbery look more plausible. The only condition was that the dogs should not be harmed, so she let them out in advance. The neighbors saw this and called her, signaling that Williams and Bareki were in the house, after which she called her husband and lured him into a deadly trap. When the unsuspecting man entered the house, he was struck on the head with a baseball bat by one of the lurking criminals, and another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance. Leon was stabbed 8 times and hit with the bat a dozen times before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. After opening the safe, the criminals found no money, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They handed over the loot to Jacques, who, in turn, gave everything to Sureta. The criminals decided not to take anything else from the house, fearing they would leave too many traces. They were only counting on the large sum promised by the client. Torment of conscience and fear of inevitable punishment. Jacques was not supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Sureta feared he would be caught on surveillance camera footage and recognized, as Toki had seen him a couple of times and knew he was his brother's wife's school friend. He was only supposed to pass on the advance payment and instructions to the accomplices. However, Jacques was anxious to ensure everything went smoothly and drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the perpetrators were in place and the victim had arrived directly to them. His car was captured on camera, and although the license plate was not clearly visible, the police were interested in the vehicle, meaning that finding its owner was only a matter of time. Furthermore, there was no money in the safe, and all the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Sureta had no way to pay the hired perpetrators, as selling diamonds, bars, or securities would expose her. She asked them to wait, but Williams and Bareki were not willing to wait and began to threaten Jacques. Desperate, Jacques had not received the money, was plagued by guilt, and his accomplices threatened to deal with him. He realized that he would end up either behind bars or follow Léon. Jacques shared his concerns with his sister, who told their mother, and together the women convinced him to voluntarily surrender to the police and reveal the other participants in the plot to secure a more lenient punishment. True motives of the mastermind. Jacques, in his full account to the police, believed he had done a noble act, as he saw Leon as a man who mistreated his wife, was abusive, and threatened to take away the children. However, it was actually Sureta who initially directed the police to consider Toki as the main suspect. Citing a will and property disputes between the brothers, the authorities decided to detain and interrogate the woman to uncover her true motives. It turned out that she and her husband had fallen out of love long ago, and each was living a separate life. Sureta had a lover in Johannesburg, whom she wanted to join permanently. However, when she expressed her desire to divorce, Leon categorically refused to agree. He also threatened to leave her with nothing and take the sons if she decided to leave him. It's hard to say what motivated Leon, but it's likely he still had feelings for his beautiful wife and hoped to mend their relationship. Sureta, however, decided that she would inherit his money and business upon his death, which would allow her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to rid herself of Toki by framing him, thus becoming the sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants after her mother-in-law's death. Her plan might have succeeded if there had been money in the safe and she had managed to pay off the hired perpetrators. Trial and sentencing of all participants. The trial of the criminal quartet took place in the spring of 2021. Each participant's role in this high-profile case was considered. Jacques Van Vuren, who made a deal with the prosecution, told everything in detail and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired perpetrators, Enrique Williams and Amantal Bareki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with special cruelty and robbery. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated the murder of her own husband, she managed to convince the court that she had been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Leon coerced her into intimacy when she was just 14 years old, and a year later, when she became pregnant, Brits, to avoid responsibility, forced her to terminate the pregnancy at a fairly late stage. In recent years, despite the disappearance of love, he refused to divorce her and threatened to take the children. Nevertheless, Sureda Brits was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole from the beginning of her term. The court considered her remorse and heartfelt confession, as well as her status as the mother of 3 minor children. However, 3 years after the sentence was passed, she remains incarcerated. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and a young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed through his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, He dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play. Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me. defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping, but the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck, but it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls, and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kin. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. On December 1st, 2022, the Mendoza Criminal Court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock, but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Minato is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Minato know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Angeliquino and Karen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Minato and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Angeliquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Karen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Karen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Minato watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Karen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Karen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, it seemed like they had found their little paradise on earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Karen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance, choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Angeliquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hardworking man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Karen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Minato, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Karen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, it took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Karen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of two wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Karen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Karen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of third-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Karen killed first Elias, and then his father by giving them ethylene glycol mixed with orange juice. This led to the severe poisoning and death of the son and father. Karen's defense representatives sought to refute the charges against her. They argued that Rolando was violent and abusive to their client, and that there was no credible evidence to support the allegations. The defense also stressed that Karen had no motive for the murder. Why would she kill Elias? Obviously, little Elias could not have posed a threat. Karen's attorney pointed out that the house, cars, and business belonged only to her. He also argued that her client had not made any purchases through her phone, and why would she have searched the internet for information about poisons when she had already used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor claimed. The lawyer emphasized that while the actions that led to the deaths of the father and son are heinous, it does not give the right to indict a person until they are fully proven guilty. The defense attempted to sow doubt among the jury by arguing that the charges against Karen were false, and Karen claimed that the antifreeze purchase could have been made by her partner by hacking into her account. She also claimed she had an alibi for when her husband was poisoned. On February 6th, Karen was not at home when he began having health problems. The defendant, known to the media as the Guaymalan poisoner, was given the opportunity to speak after the initial phase of the trial was over. Judge Diego Liberty allowed her to speak, and Karen passionately argued that she was being accused of a horrific crime she did not commit. It was extremely painful for her to realize this, especially since she was the mother of 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, and it was the turn of witness testimony that revealed new aspects of the case. The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Karen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Karen's jealousy. According to her, Karen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Karen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that, according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Karen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Karen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Karen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Karen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marimelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12th, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Karen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel. In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Karen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Karen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Karen. Finally, a prosecutor Vuzo expressed doubt that Karen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Karen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Karen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who was prosecuting Karen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Karen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Karen Oviedo be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Karen Oviedo has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Karen Oviedo was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Karen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Karen Oviedo, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Karen Oviedo kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Karen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Karen Oviedo will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. This is a story that reminds us that even the closest of relationships can hide terrible secrets and mysteries, and that true love and loyalty must always come first. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talon, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talon would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shaninia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shaninia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shaninia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shaninia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shaninia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shaninia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shaninia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shaninia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shaninia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shaninia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shaninia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Detrail's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shaninia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shaninia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shaninia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shaninia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shaninia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shaninia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon. And in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shaninia had 4 children together. as well as one child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016. An ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shaninia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shaninia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing. He must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shaninia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shaninia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shaninia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shaninia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shaninia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shaninia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shaninia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shaninia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shaninia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shaninia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shaninia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shaninia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shaninia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shaninia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shaninia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson, Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shaninia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shaninia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shaninia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shaninia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shaninia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shaninia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort that gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shaninia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shaninia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shaninia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth, but she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shaninia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shaninia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shaninia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shaninia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shaninia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shaninia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her. In February 2022, Shaninia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shaninia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shaninia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shaninia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. DeTrail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the children's hospital where Shaninia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shaninia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever. The Irene Cortez case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these two scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortez, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved, or if the murder was, indeed, unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortez? Irene Cortez, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the 3 children. A beautiful and sociable girl, She loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Henassaris. Farid Henassaris, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large, impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Henassaris surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Irene was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irina found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experience the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean, with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of 3,000 euros in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortez's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid Genasaris, had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs and, when asked to leave, one of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife, but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the sane hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar, attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest, and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortez's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. one, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years. Carlos received 17 years for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime. Starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of €3,000 from the hiding place in Cortez's house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was Genesaris who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and, most likely, really did not understand what was happening while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but, in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, the latter statement can be considered controversial, as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and, at the same time, did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question: why, after the tragedy, did Genesaris call not Irene's mother, not her uncle, or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer, and after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about Genesaris leaving Spain on fake documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket, as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral: family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortés, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, he intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Genesaris decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who, he alleged, hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with Genesaris and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Farid before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws, with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening, hence his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blanc appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this: he failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people, learning about his motive, helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Farid paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven, returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did Genesaris decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Genesaris claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Farid decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless, his passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country, and to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Genesaris repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property. No one knows what awaits him or her behind the next turn of fate. We naively plan our lives, dreaming that we will enter a prestigious university, and after graduation, we will get a high-paying job. Later, we will meet a worthy life partner, create a strong family with him, provide our children with a better future, and die in a deep old age in the circle of relatives and friends. This is probably everyone's dream. The success of some only spurs us on, gives us an incentive to live better. But what if things go differently than we expected? As we grow up, we take off our rose-colored glasses, and the clod of adult problems grows every year. It is only how we deal with it that shapes us as a person. From Angela Stalt's memoir on her website, I was born in Bangkok, Thailand, into a military family. My parents raised me with love and respect. I was disciplined but never abused by them. The woman was born in 1972. At the time of the events, she was just over 40 years old. Due to her father's work, the family often had to move around without staying in one place for long periods of time. As soon as the girl got used to the new school and had time to make friends, another move was planned. Angela lived in constant worry and anxiety. The woman's poor health also contributed to her hardships. Angela had been diagnosed with a thyroid disease, for which she had to take maintenance medication for the rest of her life. The disease depressed her mental and emotional state. However, Angela wanted to live and love like all other people. Gradually, her family settled in Georgia. Angela went to high school, where she still had difficulty adjusting. To fit in, she began to socialize with the first company that accepted her. Unfortunately, they were kids from dysfunctional families. There, she met a guy who was 3 years older than Angela and was already in his first year of college. After a year of studying, Angela made the decision to drop out of school and live with a young man. When I was 15 years old and living in Georgia, I married a very abusive man who kept me away from my parents. In addition to being treated like a prisoner, I was regularly punched and choked. Twice, as I recall, he used CPR to bring me to consciousness after choking me. I had broken ribs, a dislocated jaw, numerous bruises. My voice box was damaged and my windpipe was crushed. After 5 years of torment, I found a way to escape from him. At that time, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, and depression. I started taking antidepressants. After the breakup, Angela married a second time fairly quickly. Once again, she found herself trapped with another dominant man. At that point, she was in her early 20s. In 1996, a son was born to the couple, and all would have been nothing, except that the man was not known for his mild temper and also beat the young woman. This exacerbated my symptoms of PTSD, anxiety disorder, and depression. At this time, I started taking a highly addictive drug, Angela recalls. The former lovers eventually broke up and the baby's father disappeared. Angela was left alone with the baby in her arms. Since she never finished school, Angela had few jobs and no profession, and having a baby in her arms made it difficult to find a job. All she could think of in this situation was to find a man to take responsibility for both of them. Around the age of 25, she remarried. From her third marriage, 2 more children were born, a boy and a girl. Despite her health condition and unstable psyche, the woman cherished her family and brought up her children. However, time was ruthless, and for this marriage. In 2011, the man left the family. Later, Angela also claimed that her former spouse was no different from the previous ones. He was a manipulator and a toxic man. According to her, this is what caused the breakup. Now Angela was left alone with 3 children. One thing was good. The older children could already provide for themselves, but Angela had no other stable income except for social payments from the state. She had enough for a modest life, but she wanted to live better. Money decides everything. Probably everyone has heard this expression many times. They are an indicator of prosperity and wealth of a person. They serve as a kind of criterion of his mental abilities, luck, and judgment. However, not everyone knows how to earn them. Some are simply not given. Someone prefers to sit and do nothing while waiting for receipts from outside. Someone and does something, even trying, but gets a little, and maybe wrongly disposing of them. There is another category of people who love money and wait for it, the so-called lovers of easy money. But sooner or later there comes a moment when you have to pay the bills. In 2007, Angela and her family moved to Florida, a suburb of Daytona Beach, and settled near a young couple with children. They turned out to be James Schaefer and Candy Medina. The families quickly became friends with each other. The young people supported Angela in difficult times and often visited each other. On April 2nd, 2013, James said goodbye to Candy as he was going to his next appointment. She was sleeping sweetly in her bed with her children. That night, Candy saw her lover for the last time. Missing persons flyers described James as being about 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighing about 275 pounds. He had brown eyes, brown hair. Distinguishing features included several tattoos, one that read Gringo on his neck, a Metallica skull on his right calf, and NCC on his right forearm. The last time he was seen, he was wearing work clothes that consisted of a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes, the standard dress code for a limousine driver. James Schaefer was born in 1976 and grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, USA. He had a fairly large and close-knit family. He grew up together with his brother and sister, whose names were Christian and Andrew. The guy was fond of sports since childhood, highlighting baseball the most. After graduating from high school, together with his girlfriend Candy went in search of a better life in Florida. The couple was in a relationship for a long time, had 4 children. There was a relaxed atmosphere in the family. Each member of the family was loved. The main financial burden fell on the head of the family, James. Therefore, the guy got a job that brought a good income. The local company was engaged in the service of festive events, as well as private transportation of wealthy clients. The firm provided limousines and other expensive cars for rent. James got along with his colleagues, was polite and tactful with customers, and in good standing with the management. Time passed. It would seem that having a decent income, the financial well-being of the family should only grow, but instead, for several months in a row, the couple owed rent on the house. They even had their water turned off. The landlords were threatening to evict James and Candy soon. This kept James on his toes, looking for ways to stay off the streets. He had to do something about it. On that unfortunate night, James left his home to take a company-provided automobile. The man was to drive a group of people from Kissimmee, Florida, to Tampa and then back. The drive was to take no more than 2 hours. James arrived at work around 3 a.m., picked up the vehicle and left to complete the assignment, but never returned home. Candy became worried as a lot of time had passed and James never made contact. Later, strange messages started coming from him saying that he needed to disappear for a period of time. The poor woman didn't understand anything. Candy began calling family and friends in the hope of finding out where James was and what had happened to him. And on April 4th, the father of the missing man decided to contact the police to report his son's disappearance. On April 21st, 2013, the sheriff's office received a call from a woman who said she knew someone who might be involved in James's death. She claimed that James Schaefer was not missing or a runaway. He was murdered. The witness blamed it on her own sister. The woman said her relative had attacked the man and now she was going to kill him. Allegedly, at a family meeting, her sister confessed to everyone about killing her best friend under the influence of illegal substances. The caller was then forced to contact the police as she was worried about her demented sister's children. After James's father reported James to the police, the detectives immediately began their investigation. First, they decided to talk to Candy. Perhaps she knew something about her loved one's disappearance or had been causing wariness lately. Candy reported that her husband had gone to work, and nothing in his behavior seemed suspicious to her, except perhaps the messages that came from James and messengers after his disappearance. It later turned out that several other people in the family's inner circle had received similar texts. This information required investigation. The management of the company where James worked explained that the worker was indeed listed as one of the best employees, and such a sudden disappearance was not like him. They helped detectives clarify the time and reconstruct some of the events of that day. James arrived at work to pick up his car, got it ready to leave, and left around 4 a.m. However, the police still managed to find out something interesting. Employees of the firm said that shortly before his disappearance, James complained about financial problems and asked to borrow money. It is quite possible that this could be the reason for his disappearance. The man could have left the city to disappear from unfulfilled obligations and creditors. It was established that James had a gambling addiction. This explained his financial problems and utility and rent arrears. Detectives took this fact as a primary basis, so they continued to contact family relatives and friends. That's how police officers found themselves on the doorstep of James and Candy's friend and neighbor, Angela Stold. Angela greeted the police officers calmly, telling them that she was saddened by the disappearance of James, who was indeed her friend. He often stopped by her place after his shift for a drink, a heart-to-heart chat, and to relax. They had purely platonic feelings for each other. When Angela was having financial problems, she approached James, asking for help, to which he offered to let her do his personal bookkeeping. When asked why his wife wasn't doing it, Angela replied that there was nothing strange about it. Thus, they helped each other. She would get a small reward for the work she did, and he would get his affairs in order. Initially, everything was fine, but at one point he started having financial problems. He wanted to get social support from the state. That's why he decided to involve Angela. So their friendly relationship turned into a dependent relationship on each other. After communicating with Angela, the police officers could not get away from the idea that there was something suspicious about Angela having access to James's accounts. Several transactions that had been made after the man's disappearance raised questions, and their meetings in the mornings after work raised some doubts about the fidelity of the missing man. So the police decided to take a closer look at the family friend. Angela seemed sincere, relaxed. There was no particular reason not to believe her after all. People often ask someone close to them to do the bookkeeping or hire specialists, so Stolt was ruled out as a suspect. Once established, it seemed obvious that James's flight was due to financial problems or something similar. There was money involved in the case. Investigators went to Angela's house again, but this time they decided to do more than just talk outside the house. They also asked to see her home. But what appeared before their eyes threw the representatives of law enforcement agencies into confusion. All the rooms were littered with garbage. Dirty plates with leftovers were everywhere. The leftovers were spoiled, and it all stank. In short, it was unsanitary. It was clear that Angela had some kind of mental problems. However, they did not find James here. This is how Angela tells it. Because of my illness and injuries, I have not been able to properly clean or maintain my house for a long time. The police asked Angela to take part in the formal interrogation, which would be audio recorded. She repeated everything she had said earlier. She also said that her buddy was not addicted to substances, but was an occasional user, with some prescription drugs involved. For James, she said, it was an opportunity to relax on the weekends. Angela also said that the last time she saw the man was after he was reported missing. He came to her home and asked for money, to which she replied that she would not give him $1. The response angered the man, however, he left her home. The police also asked Angela to make a call to James, to explain the situation with the bills, to inform him that there is a big overspend, and that it could turn into something bad, to which she refused, citing the fact that he was no longer in contact with her. Angela also told about the problems at James' work, that someone from the staff threatened him, asking him to return a debt, so the detective's interest shifted to James's co-workers and his boss. A sudden call on April 21, 2013, made adjustments to the investigation of the case. The information could not be ignored. Once again, the detectives went to Angela Stolt, except that there was no trace left of the calm and balanced woman. They were met on the doorstep by a woman who clearly hadn't looked after herself in days. Her hair was sloppy. She seemed to be out of sorts. Her behavior was also inadequate, which was the reason she was deemed dangerous, both to herself and to society. On this basis, Angela was taken into custody, and later she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for 72 hours for the necessary evaluation. Before she was placed in the hospital, she spent some time under arrest at the local police department. So it was established that on April 3, 2013, she picked up James Schaefer from work after completing an order. James was alarmed. He needed to fix the situation or his family would be evicted from the house. Either he and his children would be left on the street, or they would have to move back in with their parents, which wasn't an option either. In addition, he did not want to admit to himself and his family that his difficult financial situation was caused by gambling. He was so eager to win back what he had lost. But luck had turned away from James, and there was no one else to turn to at work. It was embarrassing in front of his co-workers. He'd always repaid his debts before, but now things were going wrong. Maybe Angela will help out, and if not, I'll ask her father to help. He helped me out once before and I paid him back all my debts on time, James pondered. Angela suggested they come in and have a glass of a mixture of peach schnapps and vodka. And for more peace of mind, let's add something else. It'll help you relax, Angela suggested. James was fine with the drug, which, by the way, was only available by prescription. He even crushed the pills himself so that they would dissolve faster and enhance the effect of the alcohol. After drinking a glass, James asked his friend if her father could lend him an amount between $2,000 and $4,000. James knew that his friend's father was seriously ill and literally on the verge of death. Therefore, he himself needed money for treatment, but his situation was desperate. How can he ask such a thing, especially now? He already owes me money. I can barely make ends meet. Angela was indignant, but she didn't let on. You'll have to ask your father about that, Angela replied. James then offered to give her a ride to her parents' house so that she wouldn't have to stall and find out as soon as possible. Hope for a speedy resolution to the trouble settled in his heart. Around 5 a.m. they set out on the road. Since it was still early, Angela's father was asleep, and the woman had changed her mind about going to him. She suggested stopping the car near the cemetery located in Dayton. No one expected what happened afterward. At least that's what Angela told the police. I took James to my favorite place in Dayton, which turned out to be the cemetery, to talk to him alone. I knew he would scream, and I didn't want my kids to be abused anymore. They were being terrorized by their father, and they didn't need any more of that. So when we parked, we turned around in our seats facing each other with our backs against the doors, Angela recalled. She told James that she would not borrow money for him from her father, much less force him to take out loans for that purpose, and that she would stop doing his bookkeeping after they sorted out the bills and Social Security payments. Moll. Enough of him setting her up. Jason became enraged, started screaming and grabbed her by the throat. He screamed, "I'm going to kill you! You can't do that! It's my money!" I grabbed my cell phone that was on the console. He threw it into the back seat of my car, continuing his tirade. Angela describes his condition. According to her, he threatened that he would kill her children as well. Stolt took these threats seriously. To defend herself, she grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on from the trunk. That tool turned out to be an ice axe, which she carried with her as camping and hiking equipment. Angela struck James and hit him in the eye, but he wasn't dead. He was completely disoriented. James began to scream. Angela then took a PVC cord that she used on hikes to climb trees. Wrapping the cord around her roommate's throat, she rested her feet on the back of the driver's seat and began pulling hard on his neck. After a while, the man stopped moving. Angela pulled the ice pick out of the victim's right eye. When asked by the police about where in the car such equipment came from, the neighbor explained that she and her family were going to go camping in the next month. All these gadgets were necessary for her, and she was just storing them in the car. Everyone at Angela's interrogation was horrified. In fact, James hadn't asked for anything supernatural. She could have refused him and stopped communicating with him further. Moreover, they believed that there might not have been any threats from James at all, and that Angela's mental state had played a cruel joke on her. A medical examination later showed that Angela was aware of her own actions during the incident. The police also did not rule out that the crime could have been planned in advance. Firstly, the strange accessories in the car were questionable. Secondly, why leave the house to just talk when it could have been done in front of witnesses? To which Angela also had an answer. I knew he had some violent tendencies in the past, but he had never been violent towards me before. If I thought he was going to use physical force, I wouldn't have taken him to a place where I was in danger. I would have taken him to some public place. He almost killed me. Things could have easily gone differently, and I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. When it was over, Angela was very frightened. According to her, she was in shock, but that didn't stop her from stabbing the other eye again to make sure James was dead. But the gruesome story didn't end there. To avoid getting blood splattered on her car, she wrapped the dead man in a plastic bag. When he finally let go of me, I realized he was dead, got out of the car, and I threw up. It took quite a while before I could breathe, and then I was faced with a new kind of horror. I was on autopilot, my mind strangely shut down, and I just started doing something. I went back to the car to get my cell phone to call the police, but I couldn't find it. So I covered it up as best I could and drove to the police station. As I drove down Fort Smith Boulevard, I panicked, the thoughts going through my head telling me that the police would never believe me. My life was over. I would lose my children. I kept looking at him and the fear kept building. Anyway, with James' corpse, Angela arrived home. After that, she dragged the body to the shed. Here, taking a hacksaw, she began to cut it into pieces. The severed body fragments, Angela decided to put them into pots and pans, oiling them. A remarkable fact is that when Angela first spoke to the police about James's disappearance, his body parts were just being boiled in pots and pans. However, this went unnoticed as the investigators did not enter the house that time. When police first entered Angela's home, Stolt had already completely dismembered the body. She packed the individual parts into garbage bags and scattered them in different parts of the city. Some sources say that she was assisted in this by her older children, whom she told that she had accidentally hit a deer on the road. At the same time, she strictly forbade them to enter the shed so that they would not see the evidence of the crime. Following this confession, Angela was arrested for second-degree murder. Police officers actively searched for James's posture. Out of 206 bones, they were only able to locate 56. James Schaefer was buried in a closed casket. None of his relatives could bid him a proper farewell. Afterwards, the prosecutor's office upgraded the crime to first-degree murder because many facts pointed to a premeditated act. In addition, Angela tried to get rid of the body, covering her tracks, which wanted to confuse the investigation. Investigators believed that the woman's plan was well thought out and also included misinformation of James's relatives. For this purpose, she used his cell phone, from which she wrote to his wife and family, as well as some friends. On December 2nd, 2014, Angela Stolt went on trial. The woman immediately confessed to the murder, but insisted that she did it as a result of self-defense. The prosecutor's office tried to refute her words, as the main motive was considered to be money. Angela had been in financial trouble for most of her life, making her fearful that James would cheat and use her. That morning, when they had been drinking with James, the woman had clearly had too much to drink. Her anger at him, at life, and at the injustice of the men around her spilled out into an assault. On December 5th, 2014, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. After deliberating, they unanimously found Angela guilty of first-degree murder, as well as abuse of the body, tampering with evidence. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. What was going on in Angela's head is hard to imagine. A sick mind, a sick body, a tortured soul. However, apparently Angela still doesn't realize what she has done. She didn't just take the life of a man she considered her best friend. She brutalized him without giving him a single chance for salvation. And after all, like a butcher butchering a carcass, she dismembered James and boiled him in a pot. Money had ruined more than one friendship, but to do it this way, you'd better stay away from friends like that. Sometimes the search for paradise on earth can lead one straight into a real-life hell from which escape is impossible. However, it's only fair to note that a significant factor in this journey is who accompanies you in search of this paradise. Choosing a companion should always be done with the utmost care and caution, yet sometimes, even the person who seems closest and dearest can turn into a true, merciless monster. The tale of Yvonne Baldelli and Brian Brimager began like something out of a fairy tale. Yvonne thought she had found true love, for which she was ready to run to the ends of the earth. However, from the very beginning, her relationship raised concerns among Yvonne's family, who disapproved of her partner. Unfortunately, the family's worries were not unfounded. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in-love Yvonne left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in a swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Yvonne's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who was Yvonne Baldelli? Yvonne Olivia Baldelli, née Fold, was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself, and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimmager was not only seeing Yvonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Yvonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Carnero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Yvonne informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Yvonne sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Caranero Island, where they rented a house right on the ocean front. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Yvonne's business also developed very slowly, with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister Michelle Valenzuela almost daily, sharing everything, but her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Yvonne hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Yvonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the U.S. and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Yvonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along, and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Yvonne couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Yvonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Yvonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter, and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Yvonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time. and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Yvonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return, they would get married, and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caranero, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Brian was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Yvonne had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, He became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Yvonne, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Yvonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Yvonne's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carnero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body, along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Yvonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Yvonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using a machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Yvonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness, and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. The case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gorces, what led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child. The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits, but sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorces has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorces had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala, little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorces. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorces, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorseys worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andrés Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gorseys was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Garcés was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Garcés ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 p.m, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Garcés family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls but only sent brief messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Garcés, He would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorseys, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman.